My neighbor moved his fence 6 feet onto my land, smiled in my face like I wouldn't notice, and started acting like my property line was a suggestion. What he didn't know was that one quiet phone call would set off a chain reaction that turned his dream mansion into a nightmare of inspectors, stop work orders, and consequences he couldn't buy his way out of. His name was Whitaker Crane, the kind of guy who wears expensive shoes to check the mail, and I'm Gideon Ashford, the boring, consistent homeowner who bought my place years before Whitaker showed up with his bulldozers, designer plans, and that loud confidence people mistake for authority. It started on a Monday when I came home and saw fresh posts and bright new panels cutting through the edge of my yard, neat and straight, like it had always been there. At first I thought the contractor made a mistake, but then I saw Whitaker standing by the line with a coffee in his hand, watching his crew like a king watching servants. I told him calmly, "That fence is on my property." He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He smiled and said, "It's about right. The old markers were off." Then he added something that made my stomach go cold. "It's only a few feet. It won't matter. A few feet is how people steal land when they think you're too tired, too polite, or too scared to push back." I asked him to stop the work until we confirmed the boundary. Whitaker patted my shoulder like I was a child and said, "I'm already spending a fortune on this build. Don't slow me down." Then he walked back toward his construction site, his half-finished mansion looming behind him, like my property was already his. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just stood there, listening to the drills and hammers on a line that legally wasn't his to touch, and I realized something. Whitaker wasn't confused. He was testing me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. That night I measured from my back corner to the new fence the way my father taught me. Twice, carefully, with the kind of patience that doesn't rely on memory. 6 feet, maybe a little more. It didn't just clip a strip of grass. It cut into the side yard where my shed sat, where my irrigation line ran, where my property description had always been clear on paper, even if Whitaker wanted it blurry in real life. The next morning I walked over again, polite but firm, and asked him to pause until we got a survey. He didn't even look up from his phone. He said, "Surveys take weeks. We're not stopping." Then he offered me a solution that wasn't a solution. He said he'd pay me for the land, like the decision was already made and my consent was a formality. When I said no, his tone changed, and that's when the mask slipped. He told me I was being difficult, that his lawyers would bury me, that the fence was staying where it was. Then he leaned closer and said something that wasn't technically a threat, but carried the weight of one. "Be careful, Gideon. People who fight progress end up regretting it." After that, he started doing small things that felt designed to push me off balance. His construction lights stayed on late, blasting into my windows. His crew parked along the edge of my driveway like it was their space. One afternoon, a dump truck rolled over the corner of my yard and left deep ruts, and when I confronted the foreman, he shrugged and said, "Boss said it's his land now." That was the moment it stopped being about wood panels and dirt lines. It became about disrespect, about someone deciding they could rewrite reality because they had more money and louder confidence. I went home and opened my filing cabinet, pulled out my deed packet, the old boundary sketch, the title documents, and the survey from when I bought the place. The line wasn't off. The line was mine. And Whitaker wasn't mistaken. He was gambling that I wouldn't have the stamina to make it a legal problem. I hired a licensed surveyor named Cadence Lorne, quiet, precise, and completely unimpressed by Whitaker's mansion project. And when she arrived, she didn't step onto my yard like she was guessing. She stepped like she was reading the earth. She pulled records, checked monuments, used equipment that looked like it belonged in a science lab, and within a couple of hours she had bright flags marking the true boundary in a line that made my heart sink and then harden. The new fence wasn't just slightly over. It was clearly, undeniably over, right through flagged points that matched county records. Cadence handed me a preliminary statement and said calmly, "Your neighbor encroached. Substantially." I walked over with a copy of the findings and asked Whitaker one last time to move it back before this got formal. He laughed. He actually laughed like paperwork was a joke. He told me surveys were opinions and said, "If you try to make trouble, I'll countersue." Then he said something that revealed his whole strategy. "By the time you're done, the fence will be old and settled. Judges don't like changing what's already built." He was counting on time. He was counting on my exhaustion. He was counting on the idea that most people would rather lose a strip of land than fight a rich neighbor in court. But he didn't know something about me. I don't move fast when I'm emotional. I move fast when I'm sure. I took photos of every marker, every flag, every panel, every will rut, and I emailed everything to myself with timestamps. I also asked Cadence for the official stamped survey to be filed. Whitaker could laugh at me all he wanted, but he couldn't laugh at county records. Not forever. That evening, I didn't call a friend to rant. I didn't call Whitaker to scream. I made a simple call to the county building and zoning office. The kind of call that sounds boring until you realize boring systems are what powerful people fear most. I spoke to a compliance clerk named Jory Ben Salem and explained that active construction next door appeared to include an encroachment and that I had a licensed surveyor's flagged boundary showing a fence placed inside my parcel. Jory didn't gasp or react dramatically. He just asked for the survey, photos, and the permit number for Whitaker's build. I didn't even have to guess. The permit number was posted on a sign at the site because the law requires it. I emailed everything within 10 minutes. Then I did one more thing. I called my title company from when I purchased the home and asked about an encroachment response process, and they told me exactly how to proceed without stepping into any legal traps. The next morning, something changed in the air. Contractors moved differently, as if someone had told them to be careful. By noon, I saw a county vehicle parked near Whitaker's site, and a man in a reflective vest walked the perimeter holding a clipboard, stopping at the fence line and staring at the survey flags like they were flashing warning signs. Whitaker came outside looking annoyed, gesturing with his hands, doing that wealthy guy performance where he tries to make other people feel small. But the inspector didn't shrink. He wrote, measured, photographed, and spoke in short sentences Whitaker couldn't talk over. I stood on my porch, not smiling, not celebrating, just watching. Because the truth is, I didn't need to win with shouting. I just needed the right system to see what Whitaker had done. And once the system sees it, it doesn't care how expensive your house is. It cares where the line actually is. The stop work order didn't arrive with drama or sirens. It arrived taped neatly to a plywood post at the edge of Whitaker Crane's construction site, bright orange and impossible to ignore. By the time I noticed it, the crew already had their tools down, standing around like actors who'd forgotten their lines. Whitaker came storming out of his half-built mansion, phone pressed to his ear, his voice sharp and irritated. But when he saw the notice, his expression shifted from arrogance to disbelief. He tore the paper down, scanned it, and read it again as if repetition might change the words. Temporary halt pending boundary verification and permit compliance, it said in plain language. Temporary, my neighbor scoffed out loud, as if the word itself were insulting. He finally turned toward me and forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Looks like you made your call, he said. Congratulations. What he didn't understand was that the call wasn't personal. It was procedural. And procedures don't bend for confidence. Within hours, trucks rolled out, generators went quiet, and the constant noise that had dominated my evenings disappeared. The silence felt heavy, like the pause before something bigger fell. Whitaker tried to regain control by acting unbothered, telling anyone who would listen that it was just a paperwork delay. But the way he paced the property betrayed him. He wasn't annoyed. He was worried, because stop work orders don't appear unless someone in authority has already decided there's a real problem. That evening, Whitaker knocked on my door for the first time since the fence went up. He didn't bring an apology. He brought an offer. He spoke calmly, like a man negotiating a business deal instead of addressing a violation. He said he'd generously compensate me for the 6 feet, cover landscaping costs, even throw in a few extras if I helped smooth things over with the county. The numbers he mentioned were meant to impress me, but all they did was confirm something I already knew. He thought everything had a price, including my silence. I told him I wasn't interested. His tone changed immediately. The politeness vanished, replaced by irritation masked as concern. He warned me that disputes like this could drag on, that they could become expensive and stressful, and that I'd be better off settling. When that didn't work, he tried something else, intimidation. He mentioned his attorneys. He mentioned his connections. He mentioned how unpleasant it could become if I kept pushing. But what he never mentioned, not once, was moving the fence back. That omission spoke louder than all his words. He didn't see me as an equal property owner. He saw me as an obstacle to be managed. When he finally left, I felt something close to relief, because I knew then he wasn't confident anymore. Confident people don't negotiate after the system steps in. They comply. Whitaker was scrambling. 2 days later, the county inspector returned, this time with another official and a thicker clipboard. I learned from a quiet conversation with Jory Ben Salem that once an inspection opens a file, it rarely stays narrow. Inspectors start looking at everything. And Whitaker's project had a lot to look at. The fence encroachment was only the first issue. The grading near the property line didn't match approved plans. The retaining wall height exceeded what was permitted. A drainage modification had been made without updated approval, redirecting runoff toward my yard. Each violation on its own might have been resolved with fines and revisions. Together, they painted a picture of a build that had been rushed and bent around convenience instead of compliance. I watched as inspectors measured, photographed, and quietly discussed details Whitaker hadn't anticipated anyone double-checking. His mansion, the one he bragged about at neighborhood gatherings, the one he said would raise property values, was suddenly a liability. And the worst part for him was that none of this involved me directly anymore. I wasn't the problem he could pressure or intimidate. The problem was the paper trail. And paper trails don't flinch. By the end of the week, Whitaker stopped trying to confront me. He stopped knocking on my door. His construction site remained frozen, wrapped in caution tape and warning notices like a monument to overconfidence. Contractors avoided eye contact when they passed my house. Rumors drifted through the neighborhood in quiet fragments about delays, redesigns, and escalating costs. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I just maintained my routine, knowing something Whitaker was only beginning to understand. Once the system is involved, outcomes stop being negotiable. The fence wasn't just an encroachment anymore. It was evidence. And evidence invites scrutiny. Whitaker had tried to take 6 feet of land as if it were nothing. What he hadn't considered was how much weight those 6 feet could carry once the right people measured them. His mansion still stood, but it no longer looked invincible. It looked temporary. And that was when I realized the real shift had already happened. He no longer controlled the timeline. The system did. The final notice arrived by certified mail, not to me, but to Whitaker Crane, and I only learned about it because the reaction couldn't be hidden. Early that morning, a county truck pulled up again, followed by a survey crew and a building official carrying a thick folder stamped with authority. Whitaker came outside slower this time, no phone, no confidence, just a tight jaw and stiff posture. The order was clear. The fence had to be removed immediately, the encroached land restored to its original condition, and all work on the mansion remained suspended until full compliance was verified. There was no appeal written into the notice, no negotiation language, no soft phrasing. The line was the line, and it had been crossed. Watching the crew dismantle the fence panel by panel felt strangely quiet. Not triumphant, not vindictive, just final. 6 feet of land returned, not because I argued louder, but because the truth held. Whitaker stood off to the side, arms folded, watching his minor adjustment disappear in reverse order. And for the first time since this started, he didn't look angry. He looked defeated. Because systems don't get tired, and they don't get intimidated. They simply enforce. With the fence gone, the inspections didn't stop. In fact, they intensified. The county required revised engineering plans, environmental impact reassessments, and a full drainage correction to prevent runoff from damaging adjacent properties. Each requirement added time, and time added cost. Contractors renegotiated. Subcontractors walked away. Materials sat exposed while paperwork crawled through approval channels. What Whitaker had once called a dream build was now bleeding money daily. I learned through Jory Ben Salem that the mansion's foundation work near the property line would likely need partial demolition and reconstruction to meet code, because shortcuts had been taken under the assumption no one would look closely. That assumption had been wrong. The house hadn't turned to literal dust, but its timeline had. Its budget had. Its certainty had. Every delay chipped away at the illusion of control Whitaker once carried like a badge. He had built fast, confident that speed and money could outrun scrutiny. Instead, speed had magnified every mistake. Weeks later, Whitaker and I crossed paths by accident at the edge of our properties. There was no confrontation, no apology, no last attempt at negotiation. He nodded stiffly and looked away, as if eye contact itself acknowledged defeat. The man who once patted my shoulder and told me it wouldn't matter, now acted like the boundary between us was a wall he couldn't cross. Neighbors stopped bringing up the mansion with excitement and started talking about delays and legal trouble in hushed tones. Whitaker's reputation shifted quietly but permanently, from confident developer to cautionary tale. I didn't spread stories. I didn't correct rumors. I let reality speak. Because when someone overreaches and gets caught, they don't just lose land. They lose credibility. And credibility, once cracked, doesn't rebuild easily, no matter how expensive the house. One evening, long after the machines were gone and the dust had settled, I stood on the edge of my yard where the fence used to be and watched the sun drop behind the trees. The grass was scarred where posts had been pulled, but it was mine, every inch of it, restored not by force but by patience and precision. I didn't feel like I'd won a battle. I felt like I'd defended a principle. Whitaker tried to take 6 feet because he believed no one would stop him. What he learned was that quiet people aren't weak, they're observant. They wait, and when they act, they do it in ways that last. His mansion still stood, unfinished and uncertain, while my property line remained exactly where it had always been. Solid, verified, unmoved. And that was the real ending. Not revenge, not spectacle, but the simple, unshakable satisfaction of standing on ground that was never his to take.